Year 12s, today we're going to move on to area of study 2, which is individual and group identities. Okay, so just to run you through the key knowledge really quickly, we're looking at social and personal variation in language according to factors including age, gender, occupation, interests, aspirations, and education. We're going to look at the features of language that contribute to a sense of individual identity and group membership. We're going to talk about representations of individual and group identities in a range of texts, the ways in which the language of individuals and the language of groups is shaped by social expectations and community attitudes, the ways in which people draw on their linguistic repertoire to gain power and prestige, including exploiting overt and covert norms, the relationship between social attitudes and language choices, and metalanguage to discuss representations of identity in texts. The key skills you're going to be asked to use are to use key linguistic concepts and metalanguage appropriately to discuss the relationship between language variation and identity for both individuals and groups in an objective and systematic way. You'll also need to use key concepts and metalanguage appropriately to analyse attitudes to varieties of English in contemporary Australian society and in an objective and systematic way. Finally, you will need to explain and analyse how individual and group identities are constructed and reflected in a range of written and spoken texts. Alright, so we're going to start off today by talking about ethnolects. So, ethnic variation in Australia. Due to the effects of globalisation and economic development, the numbers of language groups in Australia in recent times has increased dramatically. As new language groups arrive and expand, cities in particular are seeing a constant expansion of multilingualism. As this is mostly concentrated in cities, the effect has been to intensify rural and urban differences. So that means that as more people of different ethnicities and from different nations move to Australia, typically they're moving to the cities, which means that now we're getting a much wider and more significant difference between the cities, the language spoken in cities compared to the languages spoken in rural areas. In 2011, the overseas-born population of Melbourne was 36.7% and 29.1% spoke a language other than English at home. According to the census that year, there are more than 251 languages spoken just in Melbourne, and that's obviously a little bit outdated now. It's almost 10 years ago, so we would assume that there would be even more languages spoken now. A study by Fairfax Media found that 200,000 more Melburnians are speaking a language other than English at home than a decade ago. An ethnolect is a cultural variety associated with a specific ethnic group. That would be a great definition to put into your scrapbooks. Ethnolects occur when an individual's use of English is influenced by another language, either their first language or one that's used in family and community settings. Ethnolects in Australia occur in both Indigenous and in migrant communities. Okay, so migrant ethnolects. Due to the cultural and linguistic diversity in the Australian population, many people are recognisable from their Australian English as non-native speakers, or specifically as first language speakers of another language. There are also, however, second and later generation Australians of non-English speaking backgrounds who employ two different varieties of Australian English, a mainstream variety when they're speaking to most interlocutors, and an ethnolect when they're speaking to their families or other members of their communities. The two varieties enable these speakers to identify with the two groups that they belong to and to express their multiple identities. So if they see themselves as being Greek Australian, for example, they might use a more standard form of Australian English in the wider Australian society than they would with their family or with people in the Greek community, where they would be more likely to use a Greek ethnolect. Non-Australian native varieties of English, such as Irish, Scottish or American, are also used as ethnolects in Australia, partly in variation with mainstream Australian English, but this has not been formally studied. Ethnolects are marked by various lexical, grammatical, phonological and or prosodic features. The use of an ethnolect stresses a common bond, common past experience and common cultural knowledge between interlocutors. Okay, we're just going to watch this video called How to Speak Greeklish.
1,
2,
3. Hello there, I'm Kyriakos, and this is Penny. We're here to teach you Greeklish.
Greeklish is a beautiful blend of Greek and English, and growing up in Australia, we've learnt to use this new vocabulary.
Penny will give us the English word, and I will just attempt to use the Greeklish one. Shall we go?
Let's do it. How are you,
How about you?
darling?
Τάλιμο,
Experience?
Experiότητα,
Visit?
Visita,
Smart?
Smartosύνη,
Book?
Το μπούκο,
Semi-trailer?
Semi-τρέλα,
Bus?
Πάση,
Car?
Κάρο,
Boot?
Booty,
Complaint?
Comply,
Interpreter?
Exply,
Specialist?
Specialistas,
Barrister?
Baristas,
Liar?
Olaias,
Thief?
Κρούκης,
Bills?
Μπίλια,
Tax return?
Successio,
Wage?
Wenza,
Lazy?
Μπότσις,
Bludger?
Πλάτζας,
Pensioner?
Πενσιονούχος,
Supermarket?
Κροσαρία,
Butcher?
Πούτσας,
Steak?
Στέκι,
Alcohol?
Αλκοχόλ,
Bacon?
Μπέικο,
Sandwich?
Σέμιτζα,
Fridge?
Φρίζα,
Oven?
Κούκα,
Grill?
Γκρίλια,
Hamburger?
Χεμπρικά,
Chops?
Τσόπια,
Chips?
Τσίπια,
Chewing gum?
Τσούγκα,
Floor?
Φλόρι,
Mop?
Μοπά,
Roof repairer?
ο Ρουφιάνος,
Welder?
Βέλτας,
Backyard?
Γιάρη,
Cleaner?
Κλίνας,
Carpet?
Καρπέτο,
Job?
Τζόμπι,
Business?
Μπίζνα,
Contract?
Κοντράτο,
Deposit?
Депόζιτο,
Auction?
Όξιο,
Mate?
Μάικ,
Culture?
Κάλτσα.
Shut up, William.
Shut up, William.
Okay, so I'd like you to go over that video again, rewatch it, and I'd like you just to jot down a few examples of Greeklish from different subsystems. So look for perhaps words that have the English root with a Greek with a Greek suffix, or pronunciation differences, phonological differences, syntactic differences. So try and get just a wide variety. Maybe look for 5 and then pop them in your notes, please. Okay, so I want you to respond to this question. What features of Greeklish did you notice in those examples? And then what changes to the subsystems have been made? So once you've got your examples, I want you to go over what features of Greeklish there are. So for example, it might be addition of the morpheme Y. And what changes to the subsystems have been made. So in that example, it would be the use of a Greek suffix onto a standard Australian English word. Okay, so overt and covert norms we have done before, but this is particularly relevant when talking about ethnolect varieties. Okay, so overt norms. Things like standard word order, subject-verb agreement, meaning that you say he went rather than he goes rather than he go. Standard orthography, complex lexemes, jargon, standard punctuation, standard pluralization or suffixation, standard affixation, consistent verb tense use, and Latinate lexemes. Covert norms might include things like slang, rhyming slang, infixes, shortenings, diminutives, acronyms, initialisms, non-standard orthography, idioms, profanity, and blending. This isn't a comprehensive list. This just gives you an idea of the kinds of things that the kinds of features that we're looking for when we talk about overt and covert norms. Okay, features of ethnolects. Discourse aspects of the primary language or culture linger the longest in their variety of English. This is demonstrated in the organisation of written and spoken discourse, particularly the length of turns and turn-taking. This can cause conflict when it comes to intercultural communication, as there can be differences when it comes to politeness, information flow, and patterns of interrupting. So, let's talk about politeness. Different cultures display different methods of showing politeness. For example, some may express directives, requests and commands, and complaints more directly than others, and will continue this practice when communicating in English. Speakers of Spanish, German, Hebrew, and Serbian are more likely to request something or complain in a more direct way than native English speakers. For example, give me that sandwich instead of, can you please pass me that sandwich? Communication patterns in many Asian cultures are even less direct than Anglo ones. This means that when people communicate across cultures, there is the possibility for people to be insulted and for others to be stereotyped as rude. Okay, now this is quite a long video, so I'm only going to show you a little bit of it. It is in German, so you'll need to read the subtitles.
Liebe Freunde von Easy German, es ist wieder Sonntag und wir sind zurück mit einer neuen Episode. Heute geht es um etwas typisch Deutsches, und zwar die Direktheit und die Ehrlichkeit der Deutschen. Viele Leute haben uns schon gesagt, ihr Deutschen, ihr seid immer so ehrlich und so direkt, ihr sagt immer direkt geradeaus eure Meinung. Das wollen wir mal heute auf der Straße testen und die Leute fragen, ob das stimmt. Los geht's. Unser Thema ist heute die Direktheit der Deutschen. Habt ihr das schon mal gehört, dass Deutsche ein bisschen direkter sind?
Ja.
Habt ihr das schon mal erlebt?
Ja, bei unseren Großeltern auf jeden Fall. Also wenn meine Oma was stört an mir, wie zum Beispiel, dass ich so roten Lippenstift trage, dann sagt es auf jeden Fall einfach so, ja, sieht schnuttig aus. Gerne mal.
Und ist ja schon mal passiert, dass du mal ehrlich deine Meinung gesagt hast und andere das als unhöflich empfunden haben?
Ja.
Ja?
Könnt ihr ihn mal interviewen auf Englisch, weil er muss da gerade durch. Er arbeitet für mich und kommt aus Amerika und genau das Ding haben wir so, dass ich immer sehr direkt bin.
Also das ist durchaus witzig, wenn man in anderen Kulturen schon unterwegs war, wo Leute nicht so direkt sind. Also ich war letztens erst in Japan, wo das nicht so deutlich zur Sprache kommt, wo sie eher zurückhaltend sind. Und in Deutschland, gerade auch beim Einkaufen oder so, sind auch Angestellte eher direkt als zurückhaltend oder höflich oder so. Das ist hilfreich, zum Teil witzig, weil die sind auch ein bisschen ungehobelt, sag ich mal so. Ne?
Ja. Sind die Deutschen direkter als andere Nationen?
Ja, besonders die Berliner.
Ja?
Ja.
Kannst du so ein Beispiel nennen oder so?
Ich weiß nicht, einfach nur, wenn ich meine Berliner Freunde und meine Nicht-Berliner Freunden vergleiche, dann hauen die ordentlich manchmal was raus im Sinne von so, keine Ahnung, das sieht ja blöd aus oder keine Ahnung, also da ist man sehr viel direkter in...
Noch einmal die Frage?
Sind die Deutschen immer ehrlich und sie sagen direkt ihre Meinung?
Das ist meine Erfahrung.
Ja?
Ja, genau.
Hast du ein Beispiel?
Meine Frau zum Beispiel, sie sagt, was sie denkt.
Also was mir in Berlin immer auffällt, dass ob ich nun zum Bäcker gehe oder sonst wohin, man kennt ja die Berliner Schnottrigkeit.
Ja.
Da weiß ich, dass der Berliner das nicht so meint, aber es kommt eben oft sehr unhöflich rüber. Und also beispielsweise in Bayern fahre ich natürlich nur zu Urlaubszwecken hin und habe dann sowieso ein sonniges Gemüt. Denke ich immer, die sind alle so nett hier.
Also auch in Deutschland besteht der Unterschied.
Zu was? Zu anderen Ländern einfach?
Nee, ich meine innerhalb Deutschlands.
Innerhalb Deutschlands auf jeden Fall. Also ich bin im Rheinland geboren und habe mich in Berlin zum ersten Mal wohlgefühlt wieder.
Okay, so here we've got people who are German agreeing and saying that, they do think that their rules of politeness are very different in Germany, and what's appropriate in German is not the same as when they are when they're speaking to people from other languages or from other cultures. Alright, information flow. Anglo-based cultures value linearity, basically logical ordering, when moving from one point to the next. Other cultures may not consider this as important. In most continental European patterns of discourse, linearity is not much of a concern for speakers. Instead, the content of the discourse is what's valued. In most Asian cultures, it's considered impolite to stick rigidly to a topic, and politeness dictates that information should not be stated explicitly, but unfolded gradually. Patterns of interrupting. For some cultures, including mainstream Australian society, including mainstream Australian, generally expect that one person will be heard before another begins to speak when engaged in polite or friendly conversation. That means that we follow the rules of turn-taking that we've been studying. In other cultures, it's considered normal and acceptable to interrupt each other and take over each other's turns to speak. The rules for signalling the end of a turn and for taking over or keeping your turn vary across cultures, whether in private or public conversations. Okay, I'd like you to pause here and complete the Temple of Dreams task that's on the Google Classroom. Alright, I want you to quickly jot down a response to this prompt. So what language features have you observed in the clip? And comment particularly on the lexical items and phonetic features. Once you finish, you can continue with the video. Alright, we're now going to look at Aboriginal English. Not long after the arrival of Europeans in Australia, pidgin varieties started to appear in Australia. Pidgin varieties of English, that is. These varieties became more important as forms of communication between Aboriginal and English speakers, as well as serving the purpose of becoming a lingua franca between speakers of different Aboriginal languages. In areas where these pidgins stabilised, creoles evolved. These various English-based creoles have much in common, but they also show some regional differences depending on the Aboriginal languages represented in them. Aboriginal English differs from Australian English in many ways, including pragmatics, so that's how context contributes to meaning. Accent features range from heavy, close to the sound system of traditional Aboriginal languages, to light, close to the sound system of Australian English. Lexical differences can be quite vast, and even familiar-looking words can have quite different meanings. Okay, I'd like you now to complete the Aboriginal English questions task on the Google Classroom. Once you're finished, come back to the video. Now I'd like you to read the English Works essay on Google Classroom and take notes. Make sure those notes go into your scrapbook as well, please. And the final task is the no sugar task on Google Classroom as well. Once you finish that, you can move on to the next video.